I want to talk about the present now. I would imagine in the long run, to make clothes for any significant market in the US, you have to do a lot of innovating, right? Like you have to figure out how to be efficient, how to use technology. And so I'm curious what you have learned.
Yeah, I mean, I think just if I may, just to kind of frame it up a little bit, because I think it's important to kind of contextualize it somewhat. I think if you, as a framing principle, say, we are going to make things in the United States, let's say as a country, you make that decision. We're gonna be a bit more protectionist in our leanings. And I would suggest that countries like Japan, South Korea, Germany, Switzerland have adopted slightly more protectionist policies than the United States have. And as a result, they have to turn inwards to say, how do we remain competitive in a highly competitive world? The United States, on the other hand, largest marketplace in the world, the cost of entry to the United States is very, very low. We've made a decision to have trade barriers be very low. And the result is that there's, and I'm overstating this to make the point, there's less incentive to invest in capabilities domestically if there's an alternative right around the corner for apparel companies, let's say, to say, why don't I go overseas?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's also the case, though, if you look at Germany or South Korea, basically other rich countries that are more protectionist and have manufacturing, they're not making a lot of clothes, right? Like those companies,
that's true.
They're making high-tech things where you have highly skilled workers using fancy equipment. They're using their sort of natural international advantage, right? And so clothes seem particularly hard. Tell me how you do it.
So I'll give you a couple of examples, and maybe one I'll go a little bit deeper on. In a typical apparel manufacturing facility, what you'll see is what is called batch sewing. So you'll see a line of operators, maybe 5 operators in a line, and they'll be sewing a sweatshirt. And each operator will have a single task. It might be Jacob's task to sew a sleeve onto a body. It might be mine to attach a hood to a body. And the next person's going to attach the zippers. And the final person's going to attach the labels. There's a bunch of ancillary problems with that. One is that you've got a massive amount of inventory tied up in work in process. Mm-hmm. And so the amount of inventory that's sitting on the floor is huge. You've got quality control problems. So let's say Jacob had a long night out in the town last night and he's attaching sleeves to bodies. He's doing it incorrectly. Catching that quality problem oftentimes takes hours, might take the next operator after 1,000 units have moved down the line to him or her where they get caught. So there's a whole bunch of things there that are maybe a bit harder to see. I call them soft costs or hidden costs. And so one response that we've done there is we've moved that batch approach to sewing into what we call modular sew or bump sew. And that is getting those same operators. First, they've got to stand up. That's a big, big change to get operators to get out of their seats and stand all day. That's a big ask. And then have operators to cross-train so that Jacob doesn't only know how to attach sleeves to bodies, but he now knows how to attach zippers and hoods and labels. He can do every function. Mm-hmm. One thing that does is it eliminates a vast amount of your work in process. That's a big deal. It implements quality control at every step. That's a big deal. So you catch quality control issues the minute they happen. The other thing is if you are productive as a team, which most of our teams are, and you beat your expected output, you get bonused for every additional unit you make in a given day. They're making more money. They're learning more. They're not just doing a single operation that's kind of a deadening one thing all day, every day. Yeah. So that's an example of one of the changes that we've made. The reason why you don't see that more in the US is that the capital investment's big. You've got to invest in the equipment. Number one, the stand-up equipment costs a lot of money. Number two, you got to train your operators, cross-train all your operators. That takes time.
So let me ask you this. I mean, why couldn't someone at a factory in Asia do that? Or could they?
You could.
Are they?
You could. Yeah, and you do see that sometimes in Asia. The paradox is that there isn't a ton of an incentive to do it, but you do see it. You see it domestically too. You see it in Asia. You see some of the facilities in Asia modernizing and using Toyota systems. I'm not sure I'm right about this. I think there's less of an incentive to do it in textiles because you can throw cheap labor at the problem in places like that. There's less of the capital equipment.
I guess part of what I'm looking for is like, besides sort of branding and price, which are clearly important, like what advantages do you get out of being in the US? And maybe one of them is, more access to capital so that you can buy the fancier machines and a more highly skilled, perhaps, workforce that can, respond to this innovation. I don't know.
I think that's one. I think the more profound ones are proximity to market. right? So I think that when you're close by, from a manufacturing standpoint, your ability, in my judgment, to have higher quality control standards, closer relationships with your suppliers is enhanced. So having spent a lot of time manufacturing things overseas, I can just tell you, when you're 5 time zones away and a language barrier in between, it's much harder to be on top of quality. I don't care what anybody says, it's just hard.
Yeah.
You spend a lot of time on planes and trying to figure out what's going on, and oftentimes you find stuff when too late, when it's on a truck or on a boat, and you got quality failures on their way to you. But look, Jacob, the bottom line is it costs more money to make stuff here.
What's sort of the frontier now, like on the manufacturing side? Like, what's the kind of frontier problem you're trying to solve now?
So we are working really hard now to take some of our learnings and pushing them upstream into our fabric providers and our dyers and our finishers and stuff, and getting them to work with us on inventory and responsiveness. So, for example, working with, let's say, Carolina Cotton Works, one of our key suppliers in Gaffney, South Carolina, so that we can, when we need another 6,000 yards, we can let them know, pick them up a day or two later, and move them up the road by, in a few hours and be going again. And constantly trying to lower work in process and increase response times so that we can be into market much faster. So that is a game of increments. That really is a game of increments.
And it seems like that's sort of abstractly how you get manufacturing clusters, right? You have these related businesses. I mean, if you go to lots of places in Asia where they make everything, there's like a million different companies that do each little
100%.
stage, and they all work with each other. I mean, it seems like that's what you're trying to build at a regional level, basically in the Southeast US, yeah?
Yeah. If you begin to build let's say a fabric supply capability that is supplying American Giant quickly, high quality, they can pivot that and look at upholstery for furniture. They can pivot that and look at upholstery for automobiles. And so there is this spidering out that happens as that capability develops. It really does build, to your point, a network of suppliers and capability regionally. So if you look like places like Gaffney, South Carolina, or Spartanburg, South Carolina, they are becoming manufacturing centers. Gaffney, a place where we get a lot of our yarn out of Gaffney, we get a lot of our fabric out of Gaffney. Gaffney has got a really vital and vibrant little manufacturing textile industry that's growing. And the more people that work there, the better they get, the more customers they attract, the more they can expand outside of specific industries. And so that's absolutely right.